The letter arrived folded 4 times, dirty at the corners, stiff with travel dust. It had no return seal, only a string of crooked writing across the front. Mr. Elias Cutter, Cutter's Gulch, Dry Sierra. Elias read it by the hearth, boots still muddy from a week's ride, hand trembling just enough to slur the ink. Inside, the offer was plain. A widow woman up in Cartwright Hill was selling off her 2 stepdaughters, twins, modest in manner and quiet of voice, she wrote. Both unclaimed, obedient, and clean, $15 each or $25 for the pair. Elias dropped the page. Smoke lifted from the stove, curling into the dusk-blue rafters of the cabin he built when he still believed love had weight enough to anchor a man. But love had not held, not for long, and now his fields grew wild with mustard weed and his barn door hung open like a loose jaw. He didn't need company. He didn't need girls, not even for cooking or mending. But there was something in the tone of that letter, cold and transactional, a mother's signature looped like a noose, that kept him from burning it. Instead, he folded it back, slipped it into his coat pocket, and poured himself a swallow of last year's corn liquor. In the morning, he hitched his mule and rode east. The town of Cartwright Hill sat bone-dry and cloudless under the weight of July. Elias arrived mid-afternoon, his shirt stuck to his spine, his eyes red from dust. He found the widow waiting by the chapel fence, a black parasol opened like a beetle's shell above her shoulder. She didn't smile, didn't offer a hand, just pointed to the house down the slope, past a line of juniper trees. "They're ready," she said. "Got 'em washed and quiet." "Why sell 'em?" Elias asked. "They ain't mine by blood. Their daddy left debts. And 2 girls coming to age in a town full of restless men don't help a widow sleep at night." He paid without further word. 2 $10 coins, scraped from the bottom of his ledger box back home. She didn't count them, only nodded and walked away, boots tapping sharp on the chapel steps. He found the twins waiting in the shade of the house porch. Identical in face, though one watched him with lowered lashes and the other held his stare like a knife balanced flat on the palm. They wore the same linen dress, pale yellow with a red sash. Their hair was black, plaited neat down their backs. Neither spoke. "You got names?" Elias asked, voice cracking dry. "I'm June," said the softer one. "I'm Wren," said the sharper. They climbed into the wagon without instruction. The mule turned slow, the road back to Cutter's Gulch stretching wide and hot beneath the burning sky. It took 2 days to ride home. The first night they camped by a creek, eating dried apples and jerky in silence. June curled beside the fire with her knees hugged close. Wren stood awake until the coals burned gray, her eyes reflecting every flicker like glass. Elias laid awake, listening to the night. They hadn't asked where they were going or why. No tears, no questions, just obedience that tasted too much like fear. Back at the homestead, the girls moved like shadows. They swept the floor, hung wet laundry, plucked weeds from the garden that hadn't grown a full tomato since the drought began. June took to the kitchen, filling the house with smells Elias hadn't known he missed, baking bread, rosemary broth, biscuits that didn't crack like bone when bitten. Wren fixed the barn door without asking. She found the rusted hammer buried in hay, oiled it, and swung it with precision. By dusk that evening, the barn closed tight and square as a coffin lid. They didn't speak unless spoken to, never raised their voices. At first, Elias thought he preferred it that way. His house had been quiet since Delia died, and he'd grown used to silence, to grief folded into the corners like old cobweb. But there was a stillness in the girls that wasn't natural. A holding in, like breath caught too long. It was June who first broke it. One morning in late August, Elias woke early and found her by the creek, barefoot in the mud, hands cupped around a frog she didn't dare crush. Her eyes were full of something, wonder maybe, or mourning. She turned, startled. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be gone from the stove." Elias shook his head. "You don't have to ask permission to breathe." She looked at him blinking. "You bought us. You can say what you like." He flinched. The honesty was sharper than any slap. "You ain't stock," he said. "But you paid." He left her there, Frog still clutched to her chest, and went to chop wood until his shoulders burned. September brought wind and a brushfire that swept the northern hills. Elias, June, and Wren worked together to dig a trench around the barn. Smoke smeared the sky, painting the sunset red. They didn't talk, only moved as if part of a single machine, throwing dirt, wetting cloth, hauling pails from the creek. When the fire passed and the land cooled again, Elias sat on the porch and stared out across the blackened ridgeline. The twins sat with him. It had become a habit now. They rarely spoke, but they shared the same space, the same breath. "You were afraid," he said finally. Wren glanced over. That it had reached the house. "That you'd burn." She shook her head. "That we'd lose something again." He didn't ask what. He didn't think he could bear the answer. By October, he'd stopped thinking of them as girls he'd purchased. They were just there, woven into the routines, into the land. They'd rebuilt the chicken coop. Wren had shot 2 coyotes that stalked too close to the lambing pen. June had begun sewing again, nothing fancy, just small things, tablecloths, pillow covers, a dress she'd made for herself, green as sagebrush. She wore it one night to supper, and Elias stared too long. "You shouldn't look," Wren said quietly. He blinked. "I wasn't." "You were." June lowered her eyes. Her cheeks burned. That night he didn't sleep. He sat outside until dawn, listening to the coyotes wail at the far end of the valley and wondering what he was turning into. In the fall, when the snowland began its slow creep down the mountains, Wren brought him the rifle he'd kept under lock since Delia died. "Teach me," she said. He hesitated. "It's not for. You think men are the only ones who get to survive." He looked at her then, really looked. 17 maybe, no more, but her spine was straight as fence wire, her hands steady. He nodded. They practiced behind the barn. Wren learned fast, too fast. By the end of the week, she could split a jug from 20 yards. By the end of the month, she shot better than he ever had. And she never smiled when she did. Just set the gun down, cleaned it like a ritual, and went back to the house. Something had been broken in her long before Cartwright Hill. Elias knew it now. He saw it in how she never turned her back to a window, how she counted each exit in a room. June was softer, but not untouched. She flinched when a man raised his voice in town. She walked with her shoulders tucked inward, like trying to hide a secret in her own bones. He hadn't just bought help. He'd brought home 2 broken hearts wrapped in silence, and something else he didn't dare name yet. A chance, maybe. But nothing good survives winter untouched, and Cutter's Gulch was a place where the past never stayed buried. The first snow came early, heavy enough to trap them on the homestead for 6 days. The storm howled through the gaps in the walls, shook the window panes, turned every breath into a ghost. They slept close to the hearth, the twins on pallets by the fire, Elias in the chair with his rifle across his lap. By the second night, June had begun humming to herself. Not a song, exactly. More like a pattern of sound, soft and lulling, the kind mothers might hum over a cradle if they hadn't forgotten how. Elias listened. He didn't speak. On the third night, Wren startled awake and kicked over a kettle. The sound clanged like gunshot. June sat up, blinking, but Wren was already on her feet, breathing hard, eyes wild and blank. "Wren," June said gently, "it's the stove." But Wren didn't hear her. She looked to Elias, then to the door, then to the corners of the room like something was hunting her. He stood slow, approached without reaching. "You're safe here." "You don't know what safe means," she said, voice rough. "You think it's something you can build, with lumber, with walls." "It's not," he asked. She looked at him, something breaking in her face. It's only safe when no one remembers you. Then she sat back down and didn't speak again. When the snow melted, Elias hitched the wagon and took them into town. Supplies were low: flour, salt, lamp oil. The girls rode silent in the back, coats pulled tight, Wren's eyes scanning every stranger like a ledger of threat. They didn't like town. He could feel it in their bones. At the general store, he caught a man staring at June too long. A wiry farmer, unfamiliar, probably from north across the gulch. Elias didn't speak, just stepped in front of her and met the man's stare until it broke. But the man still lingered outside the store. When they left, Elias saw him whispering to another, and the way they watched Wren and June, like they recognized something or someone, made his hands tighten around the reins. They rode home fast. That night he bolted the door. For the first time, Wren didn't question it. "Who do they think you are?" he asked her. She didn't answer, just stood by the window long after dark, watching for headlights that would never come. In the spring, the creek flooded and brought with it half a wagon load of driftwood and bone. Elias and Wren hauled out the dead things: a coyote's skull, a boot with the heel gone, a sack of nails so rusted they looked like teeth. Wren tossed it all into the fire pit without flinching. "It's better," she said, "when the past comes quiet, then you can burn it." He studied her then, not the way you look at a child, but the way you look at someone who's survived something you couldn't. "What did she do to you?" he asked. "She didn't have to ask who. She sold us," Wren said, "but that was mercy. What came before was worse." He waited. "She used to tell us that obedience was the only way to survive, that our silence was a gift to the men who kept the roof from collapsing." Elias felt sick. "She said girls like us were only safe when we didn't speak, when we didn't scream, when we didn't tell anyone." He sat down hard on the porch rail. Wren glanced over. "You didn't ask about the price because you thought it was fair. You asked because you thought it was wrong." "I didn't know what to do." "You brought us here," she said. "That was enough." Then in a softer voice she added, "But we're not done." June began planting a garden. It grew slow: rows of beans, squash, chard. She kept her hands in the dirt, sleeves rolled, face open to the sun like she'd never felt warmth before. When Elias asked her what she wanted from the land, she didn't say food. "Something to keep alive," she said. That struck him harder than he expected, because he realized then that they were healing, these girls. Not in great leaps, but in the small, deliberate ways the wounded learn to trust again. And he'd become part of it, even if he didn't deserve to be. But healing has gravity, and sometimes it drags back what you tried to outrun. In late June, a rider came up the trail, young, wide-shouldered, with boots too polished for dirt work. Elias saw him from the porch and met him at the fence. Wren stepped out of the barn with her rifle across her back. "I ain't here for trouble," the man said. "Just askin'." "Then ask," Elias replied. "You got two girls here, look like twins." Elias didn't blink. "What of it?" The man shifted in his saddle. "Heard there were some runaways came this way. Belonged to a Judge Tellam up in Crane Hollow. One of 'em was his." Elias didn't move. "Judge's girl, you say?" "That's the word." Wren walked to the gate and leaned on it. "Tellam's dead," she said flat. The man looked at her. "That so?" Wren nodded, throat slit in his own barn. Wife blamed the help. Said the girls were taken, been bounty on their heads since last spring. "Did you do it?" the man asked, too curious. "No," Wren said, "but I held the lantern." June came out then, walking slow, apron dusted with flour. She stopped behind Elias. The man looked between them, weighing what he saw. "You gonna report us?" June asked quietly. "I don't know," the man said. Ain't worth much to me either way. Elias stepped forward, then ride on. The man shrugged, just thought you should know who's looking. He turned the horse and went down the trail without haste, leaving nothing but hoofprints and the echo of a past that was clawing its way forward again. That night, Elias sat by the fire with the rifle across his knees. "They'll come," Wren said. "I know. You could send us away. You're not cattle." She didn't thank him, just nodded. "When they come, I want to be ready." "I'll teach you how to trap the ravine," he said. "How to gut a deer and set a tripwire. We've got 6 weeks of quiet, maybe. We use them well." June said nothing. She just reached out and took Elias' hand like a child reaching across a river. And for the first time since Delia died, Elias Cutter didn't feel like a man waiting for the world to end. He felt like someone preparing to stand against it. The canyon behind the homestead was narrow and steep, choked with deadfall and shadows. Elias showed Wren the choke points where a man might slip, where a trap could take a horse down to bone. She followed without speaking, memorizing everything. Her hands were red with sap, her face streaked with dirt, but she moved like someone born to this land. They laid wire and buried spikes, set snares where the shale turned slick. Each trap was made not for game, but for men. Elias didn't ask if she felt guilt in it. He saw in her the look of someone too long past guilt, someone for whom survival was the only shape left of justice. June stayed near the house, tending the animals, shoring up the root cellar. She patched the window panes, repainted the doors, planted lavender beside the porch as if the land itself could be made into a shield. She didn't speak of Judge Tellam, but some mornings Elias found her sitting at the edge of the field, eyes closed, hands clasped in her lap like she was remembering how to pray. One evening, after the traps were set, Elias brought out his old army revolver and placed it on the table. June stared at it, then at him. "You'll need to learn," he said. She nodded once slowly. "Do you think we'll live through it?" "I think we'll bleed for it." She picked up the pistol with both hands. "Then I want to know how to make the bleeding theirs." By mid-July, word had spread quiet and fast. Wren had caught wind of it in the feed store, 2 men asking after Cutter's Gulch, one with a pink scar across his cheek, the other limping from a crushed knee. She knew them both, not their names, but their faces. They'd been part of the judge's world, part of what had been done to her and June. "You sure?" Elias asked. "I know how they smell," Wren said. "Rot and oil and pine whiskey." They rode out on borrowed horses, tracking back the trail where the strangers had passed. Elias followed Wren's lead. She moved like a shadow in tall grass, eyes scanning each footprint, each broken twig. They found the men 2 ridges east, camped beneath a burned-out cottonwood, cooking beans over a low fire. Wren didn't speak. She stepped from the trees and raised the rifle, steady as a church bell. The scarred man reached for his belt. Elias fired once, caught him in the arm, the bone cracking like green wood. The other dove for cover, but Wren flanked him, rifle low, eyes hard. He stopped moving. "You know who I am?" she asked him. He nodded. "You know what I lost?" He didn't answer. "Then say it," she said. "Say what you did." But he only gritted his teeth, face wet with fear. Wren shot him in the leg. He screamed. Elias stepped forward, ran. She looked at him, lips bloodless. "If we leave them alive, they'll come back. We don't kill if we don't have to." "They would've." "I know." He knelt beside the wounded man, took his gun, his knife, his boots. Left him with the same mercy he'd been ready to deny 2 girls a year before. "You ride out," Elias told him. "You tell whoever sent you that this land's not for sale, not for justice, not for blood, not for history." The man nodded through his sobbing. They rode back without speaking. The wind in the canyon howled against the cliffs, and Elias saw the pain stitched deep into Wren's spine. Not rage, but memory. She hadn't pulled the trigger, not fully, but it had cost her just the same. June met them at the gate, face pale. "Where's your coat?" Elias asked. She didn't answer. Her hand trembled against the post. Wren stepped close. "What happened?" "Another man," she whispered. "Said he was with the postal route, but he asked about our names, said our faces looked familiar." Elias felt the weight of it settle in his ribs. "We're out of time." That night they packed the essentials: salt, flint, spare cartridges. They buried what they couldn't carry, hid weapons behind loose stones in the well. Wren slept with her rifle under the bed. June braided her hair tight, the way she had back in Cartwright Hill, when every day was a war you didn't speak of. Elias didn't sleep at all. He stood on the porch, coat over his shoulders, watching the stars disappear behind gathering clouds. The land smelled of thunder. Change was coming. He thought of Delia and how her death had hollowed him. But these girls had made a home of that hollow. They'd planted hope in its cracks, sharp-edged but real. And now the past had come to kill it. The attack came at dusk 3 days later. 6 riders, 2 from the judge's payroll, 4 unknowns. They came fast, hoping for surprise. But the traps in the canyon held. 1 horse fell screaming into the gulch, 2 more bucked their riders at the tripline. Elias, crouched behind the fence post, dropped 1 man with a clean shot to the shoulder. Wren picked off another from the loft window. June stayed below, reloading, calm as snowfall. They fought for 27 minutes. Elias kept count like in the old days. By the end, 4 men were dead. 1 crawled away with blood soaking his thigh. The last threw down his rifle and begged. Wren approached, rifle still raised. "You remember me now?" The man nodded. "You hunted girls," she said. "You hunted children. I just followed orders." She stepped closer, pressing the barrel to his chest. "So did wolves." Elias didn't stop her. But June did. "Let him crawl," she said. "Let them carry the story. Fear is better than corpses." Wren looked between them. Her face broke open, not with tears, but something worse. A flicker of mercy. A piece of her own soul clawing back up from where she'd buried it. She lowered the rifle. The man ran. They burned the bodies far from the house, in a pit they never spoke of again. Ash rose into the wind, taking the names of the dead with it. Wren cleaned the rifle, not looking at anyone. June stood by the fire until it collapsed into embers, arms wrapped around herself like armor. Elias sat on the porch that night, lantern dim, listening to the wind shift. The homestead was safe, for now. Inside, Wren knelt at the hearth and touched the floorboards, the knots in the wood, the soot at the edge of the stone. June swept slowly, silent. They had survived. But survival wasn't peace. And healing was a war that came after the last bullet had been fired. Summer passed with no more riders. The hills greened for a time, then browned. Coyotes moved farther east, the stream ran lower, and the air turned thin. In that silence, something else took root, not safety, not yet, but the faint shape of living. They built a second coop, planted new rows of barley, and fixed the back stoop that had been sagging since the spring frost. June began painting again. Small things, cornflowers on spare wood, birds with wings stretched wide, once a woman with 2 faces, each turned toward a different sky. Elias didn't ask her to explain. Wren returned to the canyon most days. She checked the traps, cleaned the old gun barrels, started marking a map of escape routes in the bark of the trees. She said little, but her movements were slower now, less coiled. Something in her had unknotted, not forgiven, but loosened. One morning, Elias caught her kneeling by the old stump near the ridge. In her hands was a stone with a name carved into it, crude, by knife, just 5 letters. Ruth. She was our older sister, Wren said, not turning. She died before we got sold. They said it was sickness. Elias sat beside her. She wasn't sick, she fought. That's what killed her. Tell me what happened, he said. Wren stared at the stone. She bit him, left blood in his throat. They buried her behind the church and said God would understand. Elias said nothing. The wind whistled through dry weeds. Wren didn't cry, she never had. She was the one who told us not to wait, that if anyone ever came offering freedom, even for a price, we should go. She was right. I think she'd hate what I've become. Elias looked at the mark in the stone. I don't. A letter came in early autumn. No stamp, no seal, left on the fence post. The handwriting was delicate, measured, not a threat worse, a promise. You made noise where silence was owed. I will reclaim what's mine. The judge's name still carries weight, and you are nothing but borrowed dust. Return the girls or bury them. There will not be a second ask. It was unsigned, but Wren knew who sent it, the widow, the stepmother. She was never finished with us, she said. We were worth more than just the first sale. I think she's selling the story now, making us villains, feral, dangerous. She's trying to draw us out, June said. She won't need to. She knows where we are. Elias reread the letter. We go to her, end it. June looked up sharply. You want a fight? I want to close the door, Elias said, before she opens it again. They left at dusk, left the animals penned, the house shuttered. They traveled light, no wagon, no signal. Just rifles, sidearms, food for 2 days, and the will to finish what had been left to rot. Cartwright Hill hadn't changed, still dry, still mean around the edges. The chapel roof sagged farther now, and the trees out front had turned brittle from years of poor soil and worse prayers. Elias waited outside town. Wren and June went in alone. The house was still there, porch warped, same black parasol by the door. The widow sat behind it, shawled, sipping weak tea, as if none of it had ever happened, as if the sale of blood were no more than a passing inconvenience. You came back, she said, blinking slowly. I thought you'd be dead by now. You sent men, June said. You made yourselves targets. You lied about Ruth, Wren said. The widow's smile cracked. That girl never knew her place. Wren stepped forward, and we did. You survived, didn't you? Isn't that what you wanted? We survived you, June said. Her voice was not angry, just final. The widow leaned back, the chair creaking. You think you can threaten me now, outlaws with borrowed guns. You think anyone in this town will listen to you over me. No, June said. And then she stepped aside. Elias walked up the path, rifle slung, eyes level. Behind him came 3 men and a woman from town, faces hard, shoulders squared, the man from the general store, the undertaker's daughter, the preacher's son, all silent, all watching. You made a mistake, Elias said. You should have let them go, should have counted your money and kept your tongue. The widow paled. This time, he said, the whole town will listen. Because Wren had sent letters, June had painted faces. Elias had told the story, not loudly, not at first, but just enough to make the pieces turn, just enough to make people remember what a frightened girl looks like when she's sold like cattle. The town didn't speak up before, but silence ages and rot has a smell. Now they stood there, watching. Wren drew her knife, clean and simple. But June stopped her again. She's already dying, she said, just slower than we want. And the widow seemed to shrink, her power thinning in the face of those she couldn't sell, couldn't break. They left her there, alone, the door wide open behind her, the porch sagging beneath her weight. They didn't speak until they passed the chapel. "She'll come again," Wren said. "She won't," Elias replied. "You left her with nothing to sell, and no one willing to buy." Back at the homestead, the sun was rising. The land looked gold and brittle. The fence had held. The goats bleated like no one had ever left. Elias unpacked his rifle, laid it down. Wren went to check the traps. June stood on the porch, her face turned toward the wind. "We could leave," she said. "Start again somewhere else." Elias looked out at the fields, the half-grown barley, the smokehouse still standing. "We did start again," he said, "right here." She reached for his hand, older now, not a girl's hand, not a child, but something stronger, forged. "We're not his girls anymore," she said. "No," Elias said, "you're mine now." But it wasn't possession. It was blood born of battle, kinship born of fire, a home they built not from coin or name, but by standing their ground. And though the past might rattle the door again, it would not find them unarmed. Winter returned lean and gray, the barley held through first frost. A deer was brought down in the eastern ridge, fat enough to salt 3 barrels. The girls moved like they'd been born to the rhythm now, rising before light, checking fence lines, mending leather by lamplight. No one asked who owned the land. No one asked what they'd left behind. Elias carried the rifle less, not because the world had softened, but because something inside him had. He still cleaned it each week, still watched the tree line, but his hands no longer twitched at shadows. Wren spent her mornings in the canyon mapping, not for defense anymore, for trails, paths, the old bones of the land. She marked where the pines grew densest, where the water pooled clear enough to drink. She began carving a ledger of it on old wood boards, painting over the places where danger had lived, replacing them with what was still alive. She had not forgiven, but she had moved past the need to blade every wound dry. June, once so quiet, began laughing again, not often, but real. She read aloud from the old books Delia had kept boxed in the attic. She wrote letters too, long ones, some to other girls she'd known in Cartwright Hill, some to no one, folded and kept in a jar beside her bed. She began leaving one out each morning, for Ruth. Elias never read them, but he'd seen the way June smiled after writing, like something uncoiled in her chest each time the words left her fingers. He didn't ask what she said. Some ghosts needed company, not answers. In February, a man came down from the northern pass. Not a bounty hunter, not a relative, just an old preacher with cracked boots and a mule thin from the climb. He asked for water and a place to sit. Said he remembered a judge, Tellam. Said he'd heard stories of 2 girls who'd torn something wicked out of the world and planted something better. "I thought maybe it was a lie," he told Elias. "But sometimes lies are just the way truth finds its legs." Elias gave him stew, let him sleep in the barn. The next morning the preacher left a paper behind, a birth record, unsigned, weathered. 2 names. Wren Tellam and June Tellam. Blood daughters of a man they'd buried in fire and memory. His name scratched out, their names circled in ink. Elias stared at it for a long time before burning it in the stove. Then he went out and split wood until his arms ached. When he came in, June and Wren were waiting. "You know," Wren said. "I do." June looked like she might cry, but didn't. She never did. "He hurt us," Wren said, "but we're still his." "No," Elias said, "you're still yours. He can't own that anymore." They didn't speak of it again, but the weight of it hung in the air like thawed smoke, not heavy, just real. By the time spring bloomed again, the house looked different, brighter somehow, not because they painted it or changed the windows, but because something beneath the wood had changed. Elias started carving again, Animals, mostly. A hare crouched for flight, a bear rising, two hawks. He gave one to each girl. Wren set hers by the rifle. June placed hers in the garden, half buried beneath the lavender. They rode to town twice a month now. Wren bartered hides. June taught reading to the younger children in the chapel, where the roof had been patched by hands no longer deaf to their own failings. Sometimes folks still whispered when they passed, but the whispers weren't cruel anymore, just quiet, careful, like awe. One night in late May, Wren sat on the porch and said, "I dream about her." "Who?" Elias asked. "Delia." Elias looked at her, throat tight. "She never speaks, just stands in the field, watches us work." "Does she look sad?" Wren shook her head. "She looks proud." Elias didn't speak, couldn't. June came out, joining them on the porch. The sky was bruising into dusk, all gold and iron. The fields hummed with crickets. Somewhere in the barn, a lamb kicked softly in sleep. "Do you think we'll always live like this?" June asked. "No," Wren said, "but we'll always be us now. That doesn't change." Elias felt it then, the shape of peace, not soft, not easy, but earned. They sat there until stars blinked out overhead, until the wind changed direction and smelled of rain and open earth. The land they had buried their past in was no longer just a hiding place. It was home. And though the world would never stop spinning cruelty, they were no longer spinning with it. They had stepped off, rooted themselves. Two girls who had been sold into silence, now free in a place that had once been nothing but grief and dust. And one widower, once hollowed by loss, now made whole not by replacement, but by love reborn in defiance. No blood oath, no carved stone, just the steady truth of survival. And that was the end of it.